Smaller and smaller.
What we know is that Indian people, because they move off the reservation, there's a lot of there's high rates of separation from family, there's oppression, there's deculturation, loss of employment. All of these psychosocial stressors has a large impact on the families.
My grandmother, when I was born, said name her Lakota, because that's the true name of our people. And she was afraid that it would get lost, that would soon disappear too. And so my name was Lakota all my life. It wasn't this new thing I just became. It was really a reflection of who I was at all times, being in boarding school and being with, looking at the kids from all over the place and being at a young age and just being like cattle, and the way they treated us. And I look back and it's a crime. It's ludicrous. It's the worst thing you can do to children, that what they did to us on a daily basis, and it was normalized, it was supposed to be that way. And a lot of my problems that I have now that I've had the hardest time conquering, like eating disorders or stability, staying in one place. There's just little behaviors that I've noticed that are totally directly affected, even decision making, because the boarding school system is good training to be a model prisoner. The same thing, a bell rings and you get up, a bell rings and you go to the shower, a bell rings and you go to breakfast and they feed you. It's good training to be pacified and to not think. And luckily for me it had the opposite effect, because I started organizing in boarding school and got some things changed, and we figure out how to defend ourselves.
I've been in the community all my life, product of relocation. My parents came out here. My education, it was really like a stereotype, and people did confuse me with being of another race because, of what they thought an Indian should look like. We lived on my ex-husband's reservation and stuff while my kids were growing up, and we moved back to the city, and they went like in that kind of culture shock, and stuff, from moving to a small reservation where they were, surrounded by Indians, and coming into the city and going to a predominantly white school, and then where I lived at was a predominantly black neighborhood. There was no Indians in between there and here.
Historical trauma to me is an intergenerational matter, in that there are various forms of trauma. There's your primary, your secondary, and your insidious types of trauma. Prior generations suffered more of a direct primary sorts of trauma. Now it's more of a secondary trauma.
What we found was 64% of our population had substance abuse disorders, and when we looked at gender differences, we found that 59% of women had substance abuse disorders and 72% of men had substance abuse disorders. After we looked at substance abuse disorders, we looked at anxiety disorders. And interestingly, what we found was that 58% had anxiety disorders. Another thing that we looked at was how anxiety disorders were related to substance abuse disorders. Interestingly, what we found was that anxiety disorders was the same for substance abuse and non-substance abusers. So regardless of whether our clients were using or not, they're still suffering from anxiety.